The rapport was with my father. He looked Irish. He had red, bushy eyebrows, black hair. He was lean, angular, full of charm, goodwill, and a certain professorial quietness. He spoke with a clipped British accent, tinged with touches of Irish brogue. When school finished, I raced home to be at his side, to hurry out into the backyard, where we had cages of specimens of rare animals. That courtyard was a fascinating place for a small boy. Tasmania is the only spot in the world where the prehistoric animals, the Tasmanian tiger, the Tasmanian devil, and the animal Zyurus, are found. Father had specimens of all of these in his cages, as well as kangaroo rats, opossums, sheep. I got to know these creatures very well, even the most savage, and I hated it when he had to chloroform one and dissect it. The kangaroo rat, in particular, was friendly. This animal strayed around like a dog, and it was upsetting to me to observe it being sliced up. Father's experiments were directed at determining the relationship of these animals to the human being. This was a period when Darwin was being confirmed by many biologists. Darwin was my father's hero, and he followed in the footsteps of Darwin and of Thomas Huxley. To this day, there is a very, very long account of my father's accomplishments in the British Who's Who, with no mention of the exploits of his son. Through father's activity, I made my first venture into commerce. He bought all the kangaroo rats he could get a hold of for Hobart University. I learned to set box traps in the hills of nearby Mount Wellington. He paid a shilling a head. Occasionally, I went with him on a trip in quest of one of the rare Tasmanian animals. We headed for the western coast, a difficult terrain where there were huge fossiled trees. We hunted the Tasmanian tiger, an animal so rare it took Father 4 years to trap one. Yet, though he prowled in nature frequently, he wasn't essentially an outdoors man. Mostly his work was inside, over books, papers, microscopes, slides. There were trips into the interior of Tasmania when Father went on his scientific jaunts along quiet streams up toward Launceston, which was the second biggest city in Tasmania. He looked into out-of-the-way rivers with microscopes and magnifying glasses, while I ran around ferreting rabbits or trying to catch a freshwater fish called bream. I tagged along like a puppy whenever he would take me. There was the wonderful fishing expedition when the university hired a trailer with great mental scenes to scoop up the bottom of the ocean. It was fascinating to see what came up from below. Every kind of sea animal peculiar to the region. These investigations afterwards won Father remarkable acclaim in scientific circles. The sea spider, the anemone, the giant polar crab 2 feet in width, scallops, electric eels, and electric rays. All these things came out of that steel net. He bottled his finds, exclaiming, "Oh, what a lovely thing! What a beauty! A beauty!" As if were some rare pearl or a rare woman. He was patient when I asked why he cut up some specimen. He'd have a frog stretched out with thumbtacks, and he'd split the brain. I peered over his hands, breathing heavily, and he pushed me aside gently and went on with his fine, delicate work. Once Mother brought him a new suit. I admired it enormously, but he ignored it. Yet a day or two later, when the university appropriated enough money to get some new device which would slice the ovary of the echidna, porcupine to us, the 1/200,000th of an inch, he was delighted. He jumped about like a youngster with a new toy. I also fancied myself a scientist. I found out that if you gave a duck a piece of fatty pork, something in its intestinal makeup caused the bird to pass the pork within a minute or two. From beak to exit, it was a spectacle you could observe very swiftly. We had plenty of ducks in our backyard. I pondered a night over this. It occurred to me that it would be interesting to tie a string about 10 feet long to the pork. Out came the pork, which I then gave to another duck with the same result, holding on to the string that entered the first duck's mouth. In a few minutes, I had a half-dozen ducks tied together, beak to rectum, on this greased string. I was, in a stroke, and at the age of 8 or 9, inventor of the first living bracelet. No scientist discoverer of an antibiotic could have been more enchanted than I. At once, I commercialized. I sold tickets to my friends. The ducks dragged one another around in all directions. Father came home and witnessed my venture into the world of science. "You cruel little devil!" He broke his unopened umbrella across my back. I scampered away with a cry of fright and a burst of tears. "Dad," I said, "you cut open animals all day long in your laboratory. What did I do wrong?" He looked at his broken umbrella. He saw I had a point. Tears came to his eyes. It was the only violence I ever experienced at his hands. So I was destined never to become a laboratory technician, unless my experience with women can be called such. There wasn't much room or time for religion in an atmosphere like this. There was church on Sunday, but I seemed to have no recollection of it. My ancestors in Ireland were Catholic. Legend has it that the priest came around with the hat too often, and my great-grandfather, a hard-riding, hard-drinking man, went into a rage and flew, bag and baggage, to the north of Ireland and became Church of England. By the time I was coming up in Tasmania, with the sea and the prehistoric animals in my kin and the books of Darwin lying about, the mood in the Flynn family was agnostic. God went his way, and I wound up in Hollywood. No books were ever bought, especially for me, as I recall, and I suppose it was thought that Father's books would do for me too. I think they did. The illustrated books were the most interesting, especially those of the human anatomy, the structure of the skull of man. I lingered over colorful plates of the human female vagina. Father's reading matter, including Spinoza, Nietzsche, and Voltaire, ran smack against Mother's literature. I remember going through the stacks and happening upon a rousing sex thriller called 3 Weeks by an American writer named Eleanor Glynn. There was Michael Arlen's The Green Hat, a volume that nestled alongside The Phenomenon of the Ovaries of the Echidna, comic strips from America, Mutt and Jeff, True Blue Herald, and the Katzenjammer Kids gave us a picture of the United States. Robinson Crusoe was a figure in our folk lives, and we read 2 years before the mast. My mother's people were seafaring folk. She had an ancestor named Midshipman Young. He was the chief aide of Fletcher Christian of Mutiny on the Bounty, and he had accompanied Christian to Pitcairn Island. Richmond Young captured a sword from Captain Bligh, and this sword remained in my mother's family. It was handed down, and the sword landed in our house in Tasmania, where as a small boy I played with it. The tip end came through the scabbard, and writing was engraved on the handle. My father ultimately gave his souvenir to the Naval and Military Club at Hobart, where it still hangs on a wall. I could choke him for giving it away. My mother could stretch a good story, and sometimes, when she was in a benign mood, she told me of her 2 ancestors, Robert and Frederick Young, who had a schooner, the Dainty Belle, which they sailed to the South Seas to trade. She told tales of blackbirding, capturing natives, and making them work on sugar plantations of Queensland. Apparently, Uncle Robert was involved in this practice. My predominating thought was to be the captain of a ship, a sailing ship, not one of those newfangled steamships. My primary interest became the sea. I listened to anyone who would talk of it, and I relished the occasional trips we took across the Bass Strait to Sydney. And so the two main streams of thinking in the family were very much of this earth. The primordial creatures of the nearly impenetrable Tasmanian wilderness and the eternal oceans. Around the water's edge, and only there, I was happy. I used to frolic in the water with such abandon that my father once remarked that human knowledge originally came out of the sea, as well as the human himself. But you look as if you're going from the land back to the sea. The smell of the salt was in our house in the figure of my huge grandparent, the sea captain, who was my mother's father. He was 6'4", and when he wasn't at sea sailing the William S. Bowden, he had a brief intervals with us, in which the spray of the South Seas was in our rooms heavily. I listened to his tales, and I eavesdropped when he had old mariners about, and they chattered of their travels. Grandpa put a distrust in me of steamers. "Smoke pots," he would snarl. He fought with his short wife, Edith, but she had his measure. She ran the roost like a little old bantam hen, defending me against all. I had a spotted dog of the fox terrier type, and grandfather was as fond of it as I. One day, as I played with the dog, he and my grandmother were having a loud-voiced row. Grandma, in her corner, weighing about 94 pounds and standing fully 1 inch over 5 feet, was getting the best of Grandpa, weighing over 200 pounds and standing a good 6'4". He had a sea chest which he hadn't looked at for many years. My grandmother wanted to empty it out, throw away the junk. He protested, snorting. Grandma came out of her corner, rummaging through the box, tossing old items into a pile intended for burning. "Look," he bellowed. "Now, Ma, don't throw that out. That's a porthole I brought from the Aleutians." "I'm burning the whole damned lot of stuff," she answered. "You don't need it." "Here, don't throw away that life belt. That saved my life once. I want it." "Never you mind. You're still alive. I'm burning it up." Grandpa took a deep breath and tramped out of the house, went out on a porch, and started reading the Sydney shipping news of his paper. Inside, in the fireplace, the things were burning. I got down on the floor with my dog. I growled. I teased him, grabbed him by the nose. He bit my nose. I started to bite him back. Then I picked him up, whirled him around the room, and he fell howling into the blaze. I didn't intend to throw him into the fire. Now everything was there that grandfather treasured, his souvenirs of the sea and our puppy. The howls of the dog brought him fast. When he learned what had happened and gripped also by his wife's intrusions upon his sea chest, he picked me up literally with one hand. "Now I'll throw you in the fire." He shook me as a puppy shakes a bone. Grandma, all 5 foot high, flew into the picture, started pummeling her huge husband. She shouted for him to let me go, and she made him drop me. When the situation cooled off, I told him I wanted to go to sea with him. "I would love to have you on board," he nodded grimly. "You'd make a fine cabin boy." Grandma scotched it. She could see the look in his eye if he ever got me on his ship. Yet I was moving closer to water all the time. So one day I stowed away on my grandfather's boat. He was well out to sea before I was discovered. He had a choice of carrying me off with him on some long haul, turning me into a mariner, or of sailing about and bringing me back to port. He did the latter, taking up much of his time cursing me and threatening to throw me overboard. Back home, this latest episode resulted in a family conference. What to do about me? Where was I headed for? What kind of evil was I up to? How could I be controlled? For a while, the matter simmered. I went on to school, chafing, raring to be gone around the globe. My baby sister, Rosemary, had been born 2 or 3 years earlier. Now I was 12 or 13, and I was left at home with her from time to time while my parents went out. I was a tall, skinny boy. Also, I couldn't keep my eyes off girls. My first affair was with a girl from Bernie who worked for Mother. She was a plump, blonde girl, not handsome, but available. One night, when Mother and Father were out, Carrie was seated in the living room reading. Rosemary was asleep. I hovered around her chair. I started to make a reconnaissance of her leg. She kept on reading, as if I were doing nothing. The reconnaissance went higher. This going on for some time, till suddenly she blurted out, "How much do I owe you?" 1 shilling and 9 pence, I said. She would borrow 6 or 9 pence here and there. "Come on," she said, leading the way to the bedroom. I followed a little thunderstruck at my success. From then on, I fumbled. I had, of course, absolutely no experience how to go about these matters. But I caught the hang of it. "Oh, Carrie," I exclaimed. Suddenly, she bounced into the air. "You damn little fool! You want me to have a baby?" That canceled the 1 shilling and 9 pence debt. There were no encores. She managed to keep out of my debt. I had a strange, guilty feeling. Maybe she did too. I don't think the family learned of it, but Carrie didn't last very long after that. It was a long while before I had another experience. The disputed question, what to do with the incorrigible runaway, the poor student, was suddenly settled by a development in my father's professional life. He was invited by either the London University or the London Zoo to bring the first specimens of the platypus to England. It was decided I should go with him. I accompanied him on a steamer voyage of 6 or 7 weeks. The boat had 2 principal ports of call, Durban and Cape Town in South Africa. The platypuses on the voyage from Australia to South Africa were thriving. They had to have special worms grown for them as their sole item of diet, so great preparations were made to grow the worms on board ship. The platypuses were being waited on hand and foot by my father and an assistant. Royalty never had it better, except for the diet of worms. Once again, in the interest of science, of course, I goofed. It seemed to me that these valuable species should have something more palatable than worms, and that they were entitled to an hors d'oeuvre. How could they possibly enjoy eating worms day in and day out? So, in Durban, where the ship stayed for several days and where I made a walking tour, I chanced upon a pond loaded with fine-looking tadpoles. Just the thing for a bored platypus, it seemed to me. I put a bunch of them in a tin can, returned to the ship, and fed them to the rare specimens. Just as I expected, they loved it. They gobbled them right up. That night, 2 of them were floating, feet up in the tank. Father was frantic. I thought I'd better tell him before he cut one of them open and found out the awful tadpole truth. I confessed. He didn't say a word, but the expression on his face was more than punishment. 3 lived, and they arrived safely in England. They were exhibited and attracted great interest scientifically. Father, who was about 36 or 7 by now, was acclaimed in scientific circles. Mother arrived soon afterwards, and she and Father located a school for me. It was a junior school called Southwest London College, and it might be the equivalent of a primary school in America. It was midway between Putney and Hammersmith. Father took me to this place himself, enrolled me, and there opened 2 of the most dismal years of my life. It was all so horribly cheerless. Nothing about but a few empty flower pots along some window ledges. There were special entrances for the headmaster and his small staff, and special entrances for the pupils. In front, a special muddy road led dismally to Putney Common. Beyond, you saw similar drab private houses, gray and slimy looking. The interior was divided into 3 schoolrooms on the ground floor and 3 dormitories that were located upstairs. Boys of 14 slept in one, boys of 12 in another, and the younger ones slept in the third. In each room, the lads were covered. In each room, the beds were crowded in each room, the beds were crowded in like canned anchovies. Mr. Burbridge, the headmaster, was a very fat old man, terrifying when he glared at you like a toad, and he had only about 5 years of schooling himself. There was another, Coombs, a young member of the staff. I hadn't been there a week when this splay-footed individual wanted to bugger me. I never felt such a panic as when I found myself in a corner. Coombs approached stealthily with an evil and lecherous smile, and an intent of which I had no idea at the time. Yet I sensed something highly ominous. I knew from the way he stalked me that something wasn't right. He used to put his hand on my knee, unnecessarily. My dreams at night and my waking thoughts were terrorized by the man's presence. I studied his underslung chin, the sandy chair, his sloppy clothes, and his feet that went out sideways like Charlie Chaplin's. He had the appearance of an armadillo, but his words were soothing. I had no idea what he wanted at that time, until tipped off later by other students. Apparently, Mr. Burbridge knew nothing of this, and the boys must have been too petrified to tell him. Coombs kept after me for 6 months, but I was fleet-footed and learned to stay out of his way and put him off. The captain of the cricket 11, a fellow named Burke, a big lad, caught Coombs practicing sodomy with Burke's wicket-keeper, a boy of 12. Burke had enough guts to report the matter to Mr. Burbridge. Coombs left in a hurry. The assistant headmaster was a wonderful old gentleman, aged about 60, with the picturesque name of Sir Worthbottom Smith, a down-at-heels English aristocrat, a man with a withered arm who could play cricket better with his one able arm than most athletes could with 2. He was reputed to have been a cricket champ with Surrey in his day. He had a long, high collar that made him look rather like a penguin and fierce, bushy eyebrows, and he always wore a dirty, brocaded vest. A strict disciplinarian, still he was a wonderful man. The standard of scholarship was ridiculous. Though I was backward in many academic respects, I knew that what went on here was inadequate. I already had traveled over half the world. I had been influenced by a scientist father. My horizon was far beyond the walls of this school. From the outset, I had to establish myself among the 30 or 40 fellow students. They began by mimicking my Irish-Australian accent. I discouraged that rapidly in 1 or 2 incidents. I was younger than most, but I was bigger and tougher too, I hoped. I was regarded as a colonial, a term uttered with contempt. I resented this very much, and it might have given me for a time a complex and a feeling I had something to overcome. Say, my good fellow, is it true that all Australians are cannibals? I would be asked, or, my goodness, Flynn, is it true that in Australia the women eat their young? It was a bullying spirit. A French colored boy from Madagascar became my close friend. Dufresne, his name was, and later he became prominent in politics. He was tough, and together we had the student population pretty much in control. The main thing in the mind of all was the food. I wondered why I had to thank God for such rotten edibles. You had to mumble a lot of Latin while your mouth watered and you wanted to eat even this stinking gruel. Benedictus benedictat, per jusum Christum Dominum nostrum, which I think meant, for what benefits we are about to receive, we thank our good Lord Jesus. Then you went at this thick stuff that seemed to be all gluey bread. The boys whispered to one another. Nothing has changed since Dickens.